The word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it.
So what exactly is the Order of Skull and Bones?
Well, the order originally originated in Germany and jumped the ocean. I guess it was in the 1800s. I'm nowhere near as good an expert on skull and bones as Anthony Sutton.
Well, we have this book
and
right
some
here,
other people.
America's Secret Establishment,
Yeah.
Introduction
Yes.
to the Order of Skull and Bones by Anthony C. Sutton.
Yeah, and I'll just, it's better, I'm just going, 1830, yeah. And this is a great cover. It gives you the Bones families on the back. And this is by Anthony Sutton, and I knew Anthony Sutton well, and he was an absolutely magnificent American person, historian, etc. And we'll talk a little bit about him too. And it's called, you ought to order this book. You can get it from Trying Day. And we'll just read this. This is George Bush, George W. Bush, the other one. The first one. My senior year, I joined Skull and Bones, a secret society. So secret, I can't say anything more. Okay. Then it says, every spring since 1833, 15 new faces are asked to join the Order of Skull and Bones. After Yale, many go on to the heights of power and shape our world, like I was talking about Chuck Spofford, certainly.
Yes.
And a really good man. Very, very good person. I like Chuck. This is a story of how and why. This is Jim Mars talking.
Yeah.
Quote, the public owes Anthony Sutton a debt of gratitude for this book. It is an essential primer for tracing the family's bloodlines and business entanglements of America's secret establishment. If one does not have Sutton's information, they will never truly understand American history or foreign policy. And I absolutely agree with Jim Mars on that. These are notable families: Aldrich, Bill Buckley, the late Bill Buckley,
Yep.
the Bushes, McGeorge Bundy, Cheney. Now, I think it's a different Cheney. It's not Dick Cheney. It's a
Not
different
Dick
Cheney.
Cheney.
No, it's not even his family name. Daniels, Davison, Dodge, Gates, Goodyear, Gould, Harriman, Kellogg, Lord, Lovett, Luce, Phelps, Pillsbury, Pinchot, Rockefeller, Stimson, Taft, Vanderbilt, Weyerhaeuser, Whitney. Interesting, there are quite a few names there that were friends of my father's. Anyway, Tony Sutton, he was educated at the Universities of London, Göttingen, and California. While a research fellow at the prestigious Hoover Institute, he produced the monumental 3-volume series, Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. Other books include The Best Enemy Money Can Buy, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, Wall Street and Hitler, and many others. This is fascinating right here, because Matheson was a friend of my father's, and I'm just going to read you this. This shows how deeply they were into subversion. Quote, this is Matheson writing to Donald Ogden Stewart, Skull and Bones, 1916, about Matheson's upcoming appearance before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. And so he says, quote, as long as we have somebody from Bones who can bring pressure on the committee, I should think we'll be all right. That is a very dynamite quote. And it says, for over 170 years, they have met in secret. From out of their initiates come presidents, senators, judges, cabinet secretaries, and plenty of spooks. They are titans of finance and industry, and they have just recently installed a third Skull and Bones president of the United States. George W. Bush's secret name is Temporary.
Temporary, yeah.
His father, George H. W. Bush's Bones name is Magog.
Magog.
Yes. And his grandfather, Prescott Sheldon Bush, stole for the order one of their prized possessions, Geronimo's skull. But the Order of Skull and Bones secrets have always been safe with a press of which much they owned and began. Time, Life, Fortunes, Henry Luce, Skull and Bones, 1920. Yeah. Newsweek's E. Roland, Bunny Harriman, Bones, 17. Kells Communications, Alfred Kells, Bones, 13. National Review's William Buckley, Bones, 1950. Atlantic Monthly's Davenport, Bones, 1923, among others. If the order is mentioned in the establishment press at all, Bones is defined as just, quote, a staid wayside for students. Its glory faded, end quote. America's Secret Establishment gives you a peek inside the tomb, the secret society's 146-year-old private clubhouse, and its sanctum sanctorum, the mysterious room 322. Heavily documented, including many rare reprints of original order materials, Sutton shows the interlocking power centers and foreign policy initiatives of controlled conflict, both sides, always funding both sides, dominated by bonesmen. You have to keep this going, and if you don't have a war going, then you have the war on terror. Eventually you end up able to have total control. We see it. I mean, the 9/11 really did a job on us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, from the behind-the-scenes funding of Hitler and their support for the budding Soviet Union to Vietnam, and on to later intrigues in Angola and China, Sutton shows how Bones uses the Hegelian dialectic method to divide and conquer.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice.
So now the book, Anthony's book here, I think he got the list from me.
The membership list.
Yes. And I'll tell you how that happened. So when my father was not well, one day the postman came.
Right.
And I was opening all my father's mail in because he couldn't do all these things for himself. And there were these 3 books. And so I went to Dad and I said, here are these books, the membership. Oh, gee. It's the membership of Skull and Bones, Dad. And you got it in book form. And, even at that point, I did not really know how bad it was because Sutton hadn't written the book yet. Sutton's book is the book.
Is the book.
Yes.
How bad is it? What should the people watching this really understand?
Well, they should understand that when you have 2 presidential candidates, like the last time around, who of both parties who are members of the Order of Skull and Bones, you better start doing some research. Out of a country of, 300 million people?
Yeah.
We end up with 2.
Well, there's only 15 per year?
Oh, gee. Yes, I mean, this is just absolutely, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's beyond any possibility of
chance.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Well, these are the books that are the membership lists,
yes,
right?
and these are, so this is what arrived for Dad. I mean, this is Volume 1, Living Members. Volume 2, Deceased Members. This one is May 1970. That's all the, I think that's the whole crowd going all the way back.
Listing going all the way back.
Yeah, dead and alive. And so he said to me, oh, they've never done that before. This is the first time they've ever published these little, well, this was in 1985 that they, I mean, why does it say May 1977? I don't know. Anyway, Dad said that he'd never seen them before. And that's why we have these wars, constant war, and the goal is a world system, a totalitarian world system where evidently they believe that the elite will survive and live very, very well. I just don't know how they can be so sure that their children and grandchildren are going to have the same benefits. It's something that all of us ponder, and it's very evil. But it goes back to Germany, and if you keep going back, tracing it back, it goes really back here. It goes right back to.
And what book is this?
This is an original copy of Proofs of a Conspiracy, and
what does this date from? What
it
year?
dates from 1798.
This book is from 1798.
Yes, this book is from 1798.
Wow.
And it is by John Robeson. Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies, collected from good authorities by John Robeson, Professor of Natural Philosophy and Secretary to the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Third edition, Philadelphia, published in, printed for T. Dobson, South 2nd Street, North 2nd Street, 1798. I understand that he gave this book to George Washington.
Really?
Because George Washington was a Mason, and whether he really understood, the higher orders, I don't know what rating, degree he was. There are a lot of people out there who like to say that he did. I personally think that the founders of our country, who were Masons, and there were a lot, I think that they had come from a Europe that was, full, as usual, full of turmoil, religious wars, sectarian, everything, and they came over here to a new land, and they wanted to start out a fresh start, and being a Mason was, to many of them, I prefer to believe this, a way, when life was really tough for a lot of these people, to communicate and get together in a very friendly way, sort of like whatever clubs that we have in this country. It's hard for me to believe that they would have taken the oaths, the evil oaths that the Masonic at the high level take. Now, he said here, this is the Right Honorable William Wyndham, Secretary at War, Sir, 1797. It was with great satisfaction that I learned, as these funny S's look like F's, that I learned from a friend that you coincided with me in the opinion that the information contained in this performance would make a useful impression on the minds of my countrymen. I have presumed to inscribe it with your name, that I may publicly express the pleasure which I felt when I found that neither a separation for 30 years nor the pressure of the most important business had effaced your kind remembrance of a college acquaintance or abated that obliging and polite attention with which you favored me in those early days of life. And so he does it for him. It doesn't recite terribly much there, but he starts it out, being at a friend's house in the country during some part of the summer 1795. I there saw a volume of a German periodical work called Religions Begenbeiten, Religious Occurrences, in which there was an account of the various schisms in the fraternity of Freemasons. And it goes on, and basically this book describes his trip to France, and his he did a lot of research on the French Orient Masonry, and he was so appalled by what he found. I hope I have this marked here. Well, I can remember what's in here. The discussions of how the French Revolution and everything, because they were responsible for the French Revolution.
The Masons were,
Masons,
right?
yeah. And how they could educate or brainwash the children of royalty who were religious and had a love of country and all. And there's one page in here, it's too bad, I usually have it marked, but where they actually discuss brainwashing them and getting them to understand the need for dropping borders. So the order definitely came out of Germany. And
we're looking at Adam Weishaupt, the
yeah. Oh,
the
Adam Weishaupt.
Illuminati.
Yes, absolutely, the Illuminati. This little book here is part of, I don't know, several volumes. A study that was commissioned by the Carnegie Corporation of New York to the American Historical Association to basically change American education from factual learning and history and science and everything to the kind of education we have today that was implemented after World War II. But this little book is 1934, compiled by the American Historical Association. This book was the result of a project funded to the tune of $340,000 by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, called Investigation of the Social Studies in the Schools, and was carried out by the American Historical Association. Professor Harold Lasky, a philosopher of British socialism, said of this report, quote, "At bottom and stripped of its carefully neutral phrases, the report is an educational program for a socialist America." Important excerpts from the conclusions follow. The Commission is under special obligation to its sponsor, the American Historical Association. Above all, it recognizes its indebtedness to the trustees of the Carnegie Corporation, whose financial aid made possible the whole 5-year investigation of social science instruction in the schools, eventuating in the following conclusions and recommendations. The Commission could not limit itself to a survey of textbooks, curricula, methods of instruction, and schemes of examination, but was impelled to consider the condition and prospects of the American people as a part of Western civilization merging into a world order. Of utmost importance is the following admission of the planners' goals to change our free enterprise representative republic. And let me point out here, I'll read this. You know, one could say, oh, that was written in 1934, and so what's she talking about? But Carnegie Corporation, knowingly or unknowingly, I guess they didn't care, they have consistently, through the years, been involved in projects, agreements, the one with the Soviet Union, the School to Work enterprise, what's going on right now, no more academics, our children are being trained for the global workforce, all that. They were involved in, originally, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, which now is testing values, NAEP, tests children's, 60% of it is attitudes and values that they're testing for on the environment, on whatever, right? They were deeply involved and funded the Education Commission of the States, which used to send out, all their directives from Denver, Colorado, to every state legislature. And this, usually on the Senate Education Committee, there would be one member on each state Senate Education Committee, the legislature, who was a member of the Education Commission of the States. They were deeply involved in, as I said, the United States. Reagan signed the United States-Soviet education agreements. A month after the Carnegie Corporation, David Hamburg signed the Carnegie Soviet Academy of Science agreement, which was really bad, really bad. Then we went on to their involvement with School to Work and Mark Tucker and Education for the Economy, Rochester, New York, etc., and which is what we're looking at today. And charter schools are all part of it. That's school choice. They say, and a lot of people don't know that charter schools were set up primarily for taking over the public education system through charter schools in order to implement the Cuban or Russian or German school-to-work system, training children for jobs in the workforce. They will never have an opportunity to change very rarely can you get out of it. The child is not working for his own upward mobility, what he wants. He's working for the corporate fascist state.
Right.
It's like, it's no different from Cuba. Where the children are taken out of the classroom at noon to go to the cigar factory. Well, here they're taken out of school to go to whatever other factory, or go to the nursing home, or go to the funeral home, or wherever. They take them wherever they have decided within the community what jobs are going to be available, or whatever. There are these agreements made between the public and the private sector, and how they're going to fill those jobs, and training for the workforce. This is a total change in our whole education system. They could care less about liberal arts. They could care less about foreign languages, or except, for the elite who will have to have them for foreign affairs and all, or Shakespeare, or art, or music. It's finished for our children. Finished because of this. And this book is so, so important. And as Howard Lasky said, it's a plan for a socialist America. And I've gone on and on about Carnegie because it's sort of like Little Red Riding Hood. I mean, Carnegie has left a track. It's like they started out probably earlier than 1934, but they started out with this. And they leave the bread all along, so they get to grandmother's house or whatever. And I can come all the way, I can pick up, it's just fantastic. This isn't that the other foundations are not equally bad. I mean, the Ford Foundation has done all of this stuff abroad.
Right.
Rockefeller, they're Pew, terrible Pew Foundation, and yet used to be a wonderful family, the Pew family. Very pro-American, great family. Actually, so many of these, except I can't say that for Carnegie. Ford, yeah, sort of. Some bad eggs. But they've made it so easy for me. But I've been able to follow the complete takeover of our country by an alien system, and it is the Soviet system. There is no question that right now we're going under the Soviet system, because it's the regional government system through NAFTA, through the North American Union,
right,
modeled on the European Union, referred to by Gorbachev as the new European Soviet. So what does that make us? So Carnegie is up to its eyeballs in this stuff. And so it goes on to say in this little book, the Commission, 1934 folks, was also driven to this broader conception of its task by the obvious fact that American civilization, in common with Western civilization, is passing through one of the great critical ages of history, is modifying its traditional faith in economic individualism, that's free enterprise, and is embarking upon vast experiments in social planning and control, which call for large-scale cooperation on the part of the people. Cumulative evidence supports the conclusion that in the United States, as in other countries, the age of laissez-faire in economy and government is closing, and a new age of collectivism is emerging. Okay, folks, collectivism is communism.
Right.
The implications for education are clear and imperative. A, the efficient functioning, now think in terms of Mark Tucker and David Hornbeck and education for the economy and education for all and outcomes-based education and whatever. Just think in terms of what's going on now, because this is exactly what's going on right now. They have accomplished
They wrote about it years ago.
Goal, yes. The implications for education are clear and imperative. A, the efficient functioning of the emerging economy and the full utilization of its potentialities require profound changes in the attitudes and outlook of the American people, especially the rising generation. A complete and frank recognition that the old order is passing, that the new order is emerging. This is all, when I'm reading, is in this book. Okay?
Right.
Organized public education in the United States, much more than ever before, is now compelled, if it is to fulfill its social obligation, to adjust its objectives, its curriculum, its methods of instruction, and its administrative procedures to the requirements of the emerging integrated order. If the school is to justify its maintenance and assume its responsibilities, it must recognize the new order and proceed to equip the rising generation to cooperate effectively in the increasingly interdependent society and to live rationally and well within its limitations and possibilities. All right. So that, you probably understand why I consider that book to be so
I can see
very
why.
important.
Now, this connects directly to the Reese Commission and Norman
Absolutely.
Dodd, and we really need to get into
Yes,
that right now.
absolutely. Now, what happened with these hearings in regard to the subversive activities of the tax-exempt foundations to bring about exactly what Carnegie's talking about, the world government and all that, the communists involved, Alger Hiss was, all of
Right.
them, I had always felt, had I not met Norman Dodd, I did meet Norman Dodd in the 80s, and it was Bob Goldsboro and Russ Haley and Norman Dodd and myself in a restaurant in Washington, and I sat down with him, and he told me the story. And he was a wonderful man, just a
I wish I could have been a fly in the wall for that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, just a delightful, wonderful, wonderful man.
Seemed like it from the video I saw.
Yeah, and gentleman. He Andover, Yale, Wall Street. He'd been really excellent in the world of finance, and his whole story was interesting enough. I mean, he understood what had happened with the crash. Why
Now it was engineered.
Yeah, he understood all of that, and he was working at some major bank, and he wanted to. The directors of the bank were very interested in his views, and they asked him, they said, Norm, you probably heard this from Griffin too, I guess.
Yeah.
Could you do a report or your views on what happened? Of course he did, and then he found out that he was really well, fired is hardly the word, I guess, very gently eased out and told that he could, have all his weekends free and have another job, and he could have another job in the bank, but not what he was doing or whatever. And he knew that they didn't want this information to get out in regard to the truth about the Depression. But that was probably that was probably 15 years before the hearings.
Okay.
And then he was called in because of his expertise with the big shots on Wall Street, etc. And they hired him. The Reese and Cox Committee hired him to be their research director.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a brilliant gal on staff who was a lawyer, and she really was not supportive of the investigation. She kept saying, Mr. Dodd, I think the foundations do so much good, what's going on here? But anyway, she ended up being sent to New York to go through the Carnegie papers. Mm-hmm. And the head of the Carnegie Foundation at that time was fairly young, I guess, and he didn't really realize what he was doing when he sent her over. He said, well, you can go over to this other building and you can go through all the initial papers and the records, and he just gave her carte blanche, and she went. And Catherine was her name.
Now let me stop you for a minute and back up a little bit. How did the Reese Commission, do you know how they got started, why, and why were they initially looking at the tax-exempt foundations to begin with?
Well, because the American people were upset, enough to be wondering what on earth was going on. And the Congress at that time was very American. Mm-hmm. And they began to wonder what these groups were doing. So that was the reason that the committees were formed. It didn't last very long. It was about a year or something that the hearings took place. And
he had this woman, Catherine.
Catherine went up to New York, and she literally was never the same again.
That's what I heard. She kind of went nuts?
Yes. She came back, and Norman Dodd said, she just was unable to speak. She was in a total state of shock, and she went cuckoo. and they had to find a job for her somewhere else, and then she died. And mind you, this was someone who really didn't want to even be involved in it. In the beginning, thought the foundations was doing such wonderful work. I felt that the world should know why we lost our country, because this is why we lost our country. They
it's
did
all
it.
there.
Yes, it's here. It's in Quigley's book. It's here. It's Skull and Bones. I mean, basically what we've got here today, sometimes it's good when I have lost other books.
Well, the thing is, I'm currently reading The Anglo-American Establishment by Carroll Quigley. Carroll Quigley, I do know, was a mentor to Bill Clinton, and he was basically like the official historian for the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yes.
What would you like to add, now that I've given you that springboard? What do you want to add and get into Carroll Quigley, because he is so significant to what we're talking about today.
Right, he is. Well, now this book, A History of the World in Our Time, it's by Macmillan. It was so controversial that Macmillan destroyed the plates. But there's one particular page that is very, very important in regard to what all of us are worrying about right now. Why is it that we can never have a candidate for president, and truly even candidates for Congress? The whole voting system is so controlled through primaries and all.
And now with the electronic voting
Yes.
machines, it's even more so.
Exactly.
Because they can determine who wins the election a good 3 weeks before that.
That's right.
Simply how they program the machine.
Yeah, exactly. It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's absolutely dishonest. But we ask ourselves, and we would never dream that this is intentional. And this book says on page 1247, The Future in Perspective, Tragedy and Hope, Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor at Georgetown University. Quote, "The chief problem of American political life for a long time has been how to make the two congressional parties more national and international. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea, acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out, in quotes, at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy." Terrible, huh?
So it's an art of keeping things the same no matter what happens.
That's right. And it's awfully important to know that, because I often say, if there's one thing the American people have to know, it's that there isn't any difference. And it's really a tragedy, because that means our votes
Don't mean it.
are meaningless.
And so you have the Demrepublicans and the Republicans.
You're right. Exactly.
Now, when did this really take place? When did the merger of these two parties really happen?
I think it probably happened. I don't think we've had a difference since Woodrow Wilson.
I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed.
Start off from the beginning for us. How did you get involved at that level that you were working at in the Reagan administration? How did you become the senior policy advisor in education?
That was a total miracle. I mean, a lot of the things that I've told you today really have been sort of like miracles. How I landed in these various positions where I really had no reason to be there. I mean, I certainly am not equipped to be a senior policy advisor in the U.S. Department of Education. Thank heavens I'm not, because that would mean I'd probably be pretty evil. What happened was Ronald Reagan had promised that he was going to get rid of the U.S. Department of Education, which is a totally unconstitutional entity. And I'd like to point out right there that when Carter, it was his baby, managed to get it in 1978, he promised the teachers' union he'd get that for them. And he thought he was getting all the teachers' votes, but I don't think so, because I remember reading statistics that said 60% of the American public school teachers did not want a U.S. Department of Education. A lot of people think they all run, to the tune of the NEA. They don't. They have to abide by the NEA because there's money there. They have to. It's
Right.
ridiculous how they're bribed. But anyway, so he was going to get rid of it, and all of a sudden, I was assigned to this particular slot in the U.S. Department of Ed, which is the most important position that one could possibly have in the whole world dealing with education. Okay. Yeah, because the United States is the most important country in the world, and this was the office which was connected with the UN, UNESCO, and Paris, and all over, where all of the policy was being made, and which also took directives from the UN. See, I mean, we never did anything that UN hadn't approved of, but
Right.
it came from the UN down into our office, then it would spread out all over and all over the world. So it wasn't just a U.S. Department of Ed for the United States. We were very influential in forcing a lot of rotten policies on other countries as well. So there I am, in this office, surrounded by all the old files from the other senior policy advisors, and I'm like a child in a candy shop. I don't know what to go after first, and these dumb former senior policy advisors who probably were, the former president of Columbia or Stanford. That was the level at which
Right.
they left all their stuff there.
Really?
So here I can look at all the old stuff, I can look at all the forward stuff, and then my boss, he made a big mistake. He sent me uptown to sort of get me out of his hair because I was bothering him. He didn't know what I was doing.
You were the fly in the ointment.
Yes. And he sent me uptown to the National Institute of Education. What a stupid thing to do. He sent me into the belly of the beast. I mean, I was not quite in the belly. I was in the outer rim, which controlled the belly in a way.
Right.
But one day I'm going through all these grants and contracts to see if they're being properly handled. Are they getting their reports in on time? This, just cut and dried stuff. That's what my boss sent me up to do, huh? And so I start going through these things. There are computer printouts, and I'm looking at the abstracts as they're telling me what these things are for. And I run across this one in Lansing, Michigan, and it says that they're working with first graders. And they're pre and post testing first graders on their values and their feelings about their parents and whether they fight at home and all this stuff. And I thought, oh,
This is the 80s we're talking.
yeah, and so I thought, well, this sounds sort of like what I was going through as a local school board member.
Mm-hmm.
And I always knew that I knew the National Diffusion Network was national. I knew that it came right out of the office that I was in later under Reagan. I had always followed John Goodlad, who's probably the major change agent in the world. Who's the unbelievable quotes that I have of Goodlad that, the student of the future and how we can change his behavior, and that's the goal, etc. And my husband used to say, when I have nightmares, he'd say, you're having a nightmare about John Goodlad, because I'd read all of his horrible books that had nothing to do with education, had only to do with the complete changing of our children's characters and personality for a global system.
Wow.
And, oh yeah, really bad.
More of like the hive mind, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I looked in the corner and I saw this box that said the Goodlad Study. And I thought, ooh, big box, this big.
Oh my God.
And I thought, oh, what the heck with
You hit
my
the mother
typewriter
load.
ribbon, I
Hit
did.
the mother load.
I hit the mother load, and I got in there, and all of these foundations were funding it, right? And there were 5 books that came out of it. It said in there that 4 books, I guess, that had been commissioned. One was Schooling for a Global Age. The other was the communities in their schools, and that's all community ed. all this stuff we hear about community and community councils and community ed in China and okay, arts in the school, how to use art to brainwash, and John Goodlad's A Place Called School. Well, the global education one was just unbelievable. In fact,
but that was the mother lode.
Yes, that was the mother lode for the whole mess that we're in right now. And so then Ed Curran, he gets so upset with everything that's going on in there that he writes a letter to the president, to Reagan, and recommending that his own office, the National Institute of Education, be abolished. And he has a code to get through to the president because he's a director of a very important office. He's he was far higher up than I was.
Right.
And so Reagan is out of the country at that time, and what did they do? It was either Dick Darman or someone in the White House with Reagan who sent that letter over to T.H. Bell, who was the biggest skunk, and that's a compliment, that ever. He was out of Utah.
You don't want to talk bad
And
about
he was
skunks, though, right?
really bad, real socialist. So anyway, Bell gets the letter, and he fires him, Ed Curran. And Reagan comes back and lets it stand.
Wow.
So then I realized what I was dealing with, because before I went to Washington, I was very pro-Reagan, and that California group, UROC out there, United Republicans of California in Southern California, they knew what Reagan was all about as governor. And when he was running for governor, they wrote this little book called Here's the Rest of Him.
Huh.
And UROC is still around. People like Alan Stang know about that. And so they sent me this book. This is before I went into the department. And I started reading, and I got mad. Okay, folks, see? I'm just like you, or you're just like me. I am the same way. I got very angry when these people gave me this book telling me things that I did not want to believe about Ronald Reagan.
Right.
And so I got mad at them, I got mad at the book, I put the book back in my library, and off I went to Washington. And then I found out.
That they were right.
Yes. And then Project BEST came along. Better Education Skills Through Technology. And this teacher who was meant to be dealing with that project, she was a Reagan appointee, and one day I was talking to her at her desk, and I noticed this thing on the side, and I said, "What's up?" And she said, "Oh, that's that technology initiative." And I said, "Well, what are you doing with it?" And she said, "Well, I haven't really had time to look at it." And I said, "Could I take a look at it?" So she gave me the whole thing, and I started going through it, and I saw that this was going to control the curriculum on the computer throughout the country, every state. And in it said, one document, this is what really got me. What we can control and manipulate.
Huh.
That's at the state level, right?
At the state level.
And local. So they give you the money, and then it says right there what they can control. They can, the task force, the name of the people on them, the curriculum, the this, that. And having been a local school board member, I just thought that's it. And this has got to be, I've got to leak this document, and I did, and I leaked it. This Better Education Skills Through Technology that happened to be funded by partially, the NEA was getting money from Reagan. The National Education Association, it was the NEA. The money went to the NEA, an affiliate of the NEA, the American Educational Computer and Technology or something, AECT. And so I leaked it to Human Events, but only after I'd gotten everything out of there, out of the office, because I knew I was going to get canned. And then one day, I was sitting in my office, and there was this glass between my office and my boss's. I was back in the main office again. And he was talking to the head of the technology initiative, who I knew quite well, Arthur Melmond. And Arthur really liked me because I had fooled him. He really thought I was one of them. I really had fooled him. And so I could see my boss saying, pointing her finger through the glass. Gee, he was reading Human Events. He was reading the article that I gave it to Human Events, right? He was reading the cover story on Project Best, and he pointed to Arthur, and I thought, oh, well, that's it, you know. And so I just got up and I took my purse. Everything was at home anyway, and I got out. I went home, and then the phone rang, and his secretary, who was one of us, a really good girl, she said, Charlotte, I hope you got everything out of here because you're canned and you can't come back. And I said, I'm okay, I've got everything. So then I wrote Reagan a long letter that I know he received because this journalist, John Lofton, who I knew down there, after I hadn't gotten an answer for about a month, he called Reagan's office, and the secretary said, oh yeah, he's got it right on, it's right on his desk, and he's made notes all over it, and he's sending it on to Ed Meese. And in that letter, I put that letter on my website. It's on Deliberate Dumbing Down, you can read it. And I told him everything that was going on, and even at that point, I just couldn't believe that the guy could be that bad. And I said, this is certainly not, I cannot believe that if you could see what is going on in this building, that you wouldn't have a heart attack. You've got to do something about this. This place has got to go. Or it has got to have happened what Ed Coring wanted. At least get rid of the heart of it, the rot at the National Institute of Education. Get rid of that, the research arm. And I never had an answer. I said, I want a response so that I can tell everybody that the president got my letter, that the president knows what is going on in the U.S. Department of Ed. That's all. All he has to do is say, dear Mrs. Iserbyt or Charlotte or whatever, thank you so much for your letter regarding the U.S. Department of Ed and what is going on there. Sincerely, Ronald Reagan. He doesn't have to say anything else.
Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary.
You have a really fantastic book here called Lines of Credit, Ropes of Bondage, and this is, I guess, one of your favorite little publications, and I was wondering if you could take a few minutes to tell the people who are watching why.
It's a very important little booklet that was written by a close friend of mine and also a close friend of Norman Dodds, who we've discussed elsewhere, who was the research director for the recent Cox Committee investigation of the tax-exempt foundations in the early 50s, which were so abruptly shut down for good reason. I mean, in quotes. Bob knew, this is by Robert Goldsboro, and he knew Norman Dodd very well. And in fact, it was Bob from whom I purchased the only available copy in the country of the 2,000 pages of the recent Cox Committee report, or more than that, yes. And this booklet, we could deal with, I think, probably the most important part here. The whole booklet is wonderful, and it's out of print, unfortunately. Is this part here in regard to this particular chapter 10. And it's entitled Foundation Funded Non-Bloody Revolution. And I'm going to read a bit from here. Committee Chairman B. Carroll Reese warned fellow congressmen of a diabolical conspiracy that a certain few foundations were financing the socialist and communist overthrow of the United States. The Reese Committee learned that the Rockefeller Foundation and Carnegie Endowment for International Peace were, with tax-exempt dollars, funding leftist propaganda operations aimed at changing America through the brain, not the battlefield. Patriotism, national sovereignty, individual responsibility, and Christian beliefs were belittled, while the concepts of a one-world government, socialism, collectivism, and humanism were deemed essential for peace in the modern age. Don't forget, this is in 1953. This is a United States Congress investigation of the tax-exempt foundations that we're discussing right now. A clandestine and successful non-bloody revolution had been masterminded by some of America's most powerful and devious men who did not want to be exposed by a congressional investigating committee. The man chosen by Reese to be the committee's research director was Norman Dodd, the Yale graduate, intellectual, and New York investment banker. During this writer's, that's Robert Goldsborough's frequent visits to Dodd's retirement home in Keene, Virginia, he repeatedly spoke of his conviction that justice demanded that those foundations, quote, should be compelled to spend a like amount of dollars to undo the damage they have done to America, end quote. And don't think, folks, that this doesn't exist right now either. I mean, the same, just even worse, there are more foundations out there. The Pew Foundation is a new one that got involved. Marvelous family, the Pew family was, up until, about 20 years ago. The money from the foundation got into the hands of the left-wing termites. Left-wing is now right-wing, too. Okay, Dodd sent committee questionnaires to numerous foundations, and as a result of one such request, Joseph E. Johnson, president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, invited Dodd to send a committee staffer to Carnegie's headquarters in New York City to examine the minutes of the meetings of the endowment's trustees. These minutes had long since been stored away in a warehouse, and obviously Johnson, who was a close friend of former Carnegie president and Soviet spy Alger Hiss, had no idea what was in them. The minutes revealed that in 1910, the Carnegie trustees asked themselves this question, quote, is there any way known to man more effective than war to so alter the life of an entire people, end quote. For a year, the trustees sought an effective, in quotes, peaceful method to, in quotes, alter the life of an entire people. But ultimately, they concluded, isn't that nice of them to have spent that much time trying to avoid their final conclusion, right? But ultimately, they concluded that war was the most effective way to change people. Please listen closely to this, folks. Think about what's going on now, and has gone on ever since 1945. And before 1945, because that's what we're talking about.
Right.
This is 1911 we're talking. War was the most effective way to change people. Think of all the wars we've had since then.
Yeah, a lot.
Consequently, the trustees of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace next asked themselves, quote, how do we involve the United States in a war? And they answered, well, we must control the diplomatic machinery of the United States by first gaining control of the State Department. It's direct quotes. I mean, I'm quoting from Goldsborough, but this is a direct quote from Goldsborough's research. Norm Dodd said that the trustees' minutes reinforced what the Reese Committee had uncovered elsewhere about the Carnegie Endowment, that, quote, it had already become a powerful policy-making force inside the State Department. Now, let me say something right here. The Carnegie Corporation was deeply involved in everything. We've discussed this elsewhere, but principally, when we're talking about this particular issue, they were involved in the Carnegie Soviet, the agreement between Carnegie and the Soviet Academy of Science, which took place a month before Reagan signed the U.S.-Soviet education agreement. So Carnegie has just been with the Soviet Union all the way along. All right, how do we involve the United States in a war? We control the State Department. Norm Dodd said the trustees' minutes reinforced what the Reese Committee had uncovered elsewhere about the Carnegie Endowment, that it had already become a powerful policy-making force inside the State Department. I worked in the State Department in Soviet affairs, I remember, in 1959. And I saw a lot of weird things there, too. During those early years of the Carnegie Endowment, war clouds were already forming over Europe, and the opportunity for the enactment of their plan was drawing near. This is pre-World War I. History proved that World War I did indeed have an enormous impact on the American people. For the first time in our history, large numbers of wives and mothers had to leave the home to work in war factories, thus effectively eroding women's historic role as the heart, in quotes, of the family. The sanctity of the family itself was placed in jeopardy. Life in America was so thoroughly changed that, according to Norman Dodd, quote, the trustees had the brashness to congratulate themselves on the wisdom and validity of their original decision, end quote. They sent a confidential message to President Wilson. This is the trustees of the Carnegie Endowment. A confidential message to President Wilson insisting that the war not be ended too quickly. Now keep in mind, this is when we had soldiers in Europe, the Belgians, the French, everybody, even the other side, World War I, were dying in numbers that are absolutely incomprehensible. I mean, in Flanders, I think in one day, 10,000 died. I don't know, maybe more in where the poppies grow. So recall this, war at that time was just, there's no way to describe how horrendous it was. So here they're saying, that they're going to postpone the end of this horror story. So they sent a confidential message to President Wilson insisting that the war not be ended too quickly. Carnegie trustee Cleveland Dodge, one of Wilson's financial supporters, had direct access to the president, as did Elihu Root, endowment president from 1910 to 1925. After the war, the Carnegie Endowment trustees reasoned that if they could get control of education in the United States, they would be able to prevent a return to the way of life as it had been prior to the war. And they recruited the Rockefeller Foundation to assist in such a monumental task. According to Dodd, they divided the task in parts, giving to the Rockefeller Foundation the responsibility of altering education as it pertains to domestic subjects. But Carnegie retained the task of altering our education in foreign affairs and about international relations. And I just mentioned to you that the agreement was signed with with the Soviet Academy of Science in 1985, and that was just one of few agreements. The foundations decided the most effective method of achieving this goal would be by altering American history. So they awarded grants, fellowships, and scholarships to those professors and historians who would rewrite American history and promote one-worldism, humanism, and socialism. By the early 30s, the well-laid plans of the foundation trustees had reached fruition. Remember that little blue book I showed you?
Yes.
Conclusions and Recommendations for the Social Studies? Yes. That's a direct result of this movement, this effort. By the early 30s, the well-laid plans of the foundation trustees had reached fruition. The book was dated, I think, 1934. And a Reese Committee staff report concluded, 1, that there had indeed been a non-bloody revolution in America between 1933 and 1936. 2, that a certain few foundations had funded efforts to change the beliefs of the American people through education and propaganda. And 3, that these revolutionary changes had been accepted without resistance.
This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.